All right. Good evening. It's Professor Collins. This is in the part of the discussion board for Module 4, where you're looking out for a current situation of unethical behavior in the newspapers, a current story. At this point in the class, I usually like to relate a situation I experienced in my career of 34 years in the New York City Police Department. This goes back about 35 years ago. I was a young police officer in the Midtown North precinct in Midtown Manhattan, Times Square area, and it takes place with two gentlemen, one by the name of Sergeant Bullard, who was a young sergeant, made sergeant with less than 10 years on the job. He was kind of a cocky, good-looking, well-respected by the men, all patrol sergeant, and a gentleman, real nice guy, Greg Milhouse. Greg wasn't a real go-getter, so to speak, so he usually drove the sergeant, but a solid guy that you would be happy to work with. Likable guy, quiet, but always very friendly. And there is a procedure in the city of New York and within the procedures of the New York City Police Department, when you come across a dead body case in an apartment, in a residence that doesn't have anyone else living with them, they live alone, that the police department is to conduct a search, gather any valuables and invoice them, to be handed over to the probate, and the survivors and family can work it out through the courts in New York, what it's done, and it's usually supervised by a sergeant. On a certain dead body case, Sergeant Bullard came across a negotiable bond, a bearer bond that was worth a certain amount of money, and kept it. And in order to cash in on this, he reached out to a local character in the neighborhood who may or may not have been involved in organized crime, may have been a hanger-oner, but he was supposed to be able to move stolen property. But also he was an informant for anybody that would pay him money. So the individual that Bullard had reached out to fence this property reported it to Internal Affairs. A sting is set up in a diner where Bullard is to bring the negotiable bond, give it to the fence, who will work out some sort of deal of a price and pay for it. This takes place in the 10th precinct, 2 precincts over from the Midtown North. In a diner, 2 rookie cops come in and recognize Bullard from where they were in the training unit in Midtown North. They go over and say hello and leave the area. As soon as they leave, they're scooped up by Internal Affairs. Internal Affairs comes in and scoops up Bullard and the so-called organized crime individual and take them in. It's found out that the rookies had nothing to do with this. They were just getting coffee, although they were scooped up, held without any representation, had their garrity rights, their collective bargaining rights violated, but they had to be sure in Internal Affairs in their investigation. And it turns out that Bullard is allowed to resign from the police department, and the idea being that the department got rid of a bad cop and they don't have to deal with him, plus keeping publicity and having him go to court and getting into the newspapers that there's corruption going on in the New York State Police Department. This was in 1982, 10 years after the Knapp Commission, and a very big investigation into widespread corruption in the New York State Police Department, and the powers that be wanted to keep the public thinking that the police department was not corrupt. And if anybody looked at Jammed Up and the book review on Jammed Up, there wasn't much corruption, but it was all individual situations like our friend Bullard. Lo and behold, Bullard is goes on with his life. The last time I saw him was a year or 2 later. He was a bouncer in a bar by Madison Square Garden. That's about the best he could do as a fired cop, police sergeant, excuse me. What happens, lo and behold, after this incident, Milhouse is served with department charges and specifications, the number 1 charge being failure to report corruption. He is put on trial, tried by administratively, an administrative trial by the department's advocate's office, groups of attorneys that work for the police department and advocate cops who have gotten into serious trouble and thus charged. His defense is he wasn't involved in this, he didn't do anything with Bullard, he knew nothing of it, and he just claims complete ignorance and not being involved. The informant then testifies against him, saying that he had conversations with Bullard through the window with Millstone sitting in the car. Millstone is found guilty and then fired. The idea of the police department was get rid of a bad cop, but make an example of people so that they continue to report corruption. Kind of they didn't want it out for the public to know, but they wanted it within the department that it would not be tolerated if you find out about corruption that you must report it. As far as motivations, I think, Sergeant Bullard didn't just one day decide, hey, I'm going to risk everything I've got and for this bearer bond. I don't think that bearer bond could have been that valuable. And even in fencing it, he would have gotten 10 cents on the dollar. So it was a $50,000 bond. He just sold his whole career and his good name and his pension for $5,000. If that's even what it was. I would imagine it was probably far less. But I think he was just that type of individual, that classic, that he made the conscious decision to take a deceased person's property and violate his oath and trust. Millhouse, on the other hand, I think was misguided into a culture that was still in those days that you didn't inform on another police officer, keep up the blue wall of silence, don't inform on people, and was subsequently suffered the same consequences. They both were fired from the job. Both Millhouse, the unions helped him out and got into a construction union, was able to feed his family. But it's a very tragic tale of what happens and people's motivations. And as I've tried to say in some of our other discussions, is that there's that ripple effect. There's that collateral damage of the unethical behavior by one individual can affect numerous people. And as I said, the families of Greg Millhouse, the people that work with him, this was a very, very tough thing for all of us. We really felt bad for him. I thought it was unfair for many years until I, progressed further in the job, matured in the job, and realized that once you do find out about something like that, and there was areas that he could have gone to than just going to internal affairs. He could have gone to the union. He could have gone to people that he knew and let them know of this situation. Now there are things in effect of anonymous tip lines, emails, and such that you can report corruption. But this was, as I said, 35 years ago, and a number of lives were ruined on the unethical behavior of Sergeant Bullard.